Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. This is video number 4 of A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple. And before I forget, I looked up the electric sun theory, and there's a series of lectures on YouTube by Dr. Donald Scott. I almost forgot again. Dr. Donald Scott. And great lecturer and really fascinating. So thank you to the viewer who recommended that. We are on chapter 14, Electric People. A guy called Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize winner of physics in 1933, he thought that physicists were on their wrong track in their conventional beliefs. Duh. Percy Bridgman, who won the Nobel Prize in 1946, said that nobody really could even define what a field was. They talk about a magnetic field or an electronic field. They don't even know. David Bohm, B-O-H-M, he showed the concept with math. Remember I said in the last video, math is often used before they even know what they're looking at. They can describe it with math. And he said there's no evidence except the math, but the ideas would be proven someday. And the author says that scientists with courage speak out when they have an idea that they can't necessarily prove, but it's taking us on a different route. And he said, you'll be attacked by the herd. But these people are renegades. They think with their own brain and not with the herd mentality. Many brilliant scientists say that we know very little about electricity, gravity, quantum physics. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And, for example, Peter Mitchell says nobody knows what energy really is. I mean, we just throw these terms around. Richard Feynman says that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Ilya Prigozhin says that we are at the beginning of science. We're at the beginning of studying the complexity of nature. Albert Saint-Georges discovered okay, I don't even know what this is. I wrote it down, and I don't even know V pi c. I guess this is an equation. And he was a Hungarian resistance fighter who won the Nobel Prize for Physics and Medicine in 1937. So he was an anti-Nazi. So guess who resisted him after the war? He believed that cancer was an electronic malfunction within the body. Funny thing, that's kind of what Nostradamus said. And he wrote Bioenergetics in 1957, still without really fully understanding any of this. And this was published before biophysics was actually an independent course of study. He was sidelined from mainstream science because he challenged conventional thinking. He said that submolecular electronic dimension of biology was where to investigate life, where to investigate nature. He said every molecule of the body contains plasma that's negatively charged, and therefore every human cell is electronic. And I will say I deserve the Nobel Prize for parapsychology because I have been saying for years, poltergeist activity, ghost activity, what was that other thing that we were talking about the other day? Oh, well, ESP, telepathy. All those areas are totally not mysterious if you regard them from an electromagnetic point of view. That we're all just batteries, kind of, and some people's batteries are sort of just tuned to a different reception. And I know how ridiculously oversimplified that is, but essentially that's what they're saying. I mean, they make it sound really complicated, and and it is, but to bring it down to our level of the dog understanding the algebra problem. That's kind of what's going on here. These scientists, especially this guy, what was his name again? Prigozhin, he said, pushed against the conventional biology, and he got sidelined. Let me make sure I gave him credit and I'm using the right name. And I'm not. Prigozhin was right, the guy before him. This is Albert St. Yeah, I wanted to be sure I named the right scientist. And, he was an anti-Nazi. And because of that, the Nazis, he wasn't popular with the big shot Nazis who were now in the CIA and national security. He experimented on 60,000 Jews. Hitler's, not St. George, this Hitler's personal hypnotist. So let me back up. I write my notes in shorthand, not real shorthand, my own personal shorthand, which even I can't read. So Allen Dulles started the CIA. We talked about him. Big authoritarian. He brought over Hitler's personal hypnotist, because, everybody should have one, right? His name was Frank Volgese, and he was responsible for experimenting on 60,000 Jews in the camps during the war. He did mind control experiments on people, and he was a Hungarian war criminal, and he was really afraid of St. George, because remember, St. George was in the Hungarian resistance. So here was this real conflict going on underneath the scientific conflict. And St. George was relegated to unimportant jobs in mussel research in a small oceanographic institute in Massachusetts. He could not get a job in his field. Nobel Prize winner. And his work laid the groundwork for the field of biophysics and biophoton research and how energy is used in the body. This guy was a genius, and he was on the cutting edge of biophysical research, and he was sidelined by Nazis in the United States intelligence and research. He, for example, identified several kinds of ice. Changing pressure changes how hydrogen molecules line up and connect, and he proved that ice is not all exactly the same. He also identified several kinds of water, and this is actually discussed in New Age homeopathy, that water has memory. And I think it was in one of Dolores Cannon's books. One of her subjects was told that they had to do something to water. I forget exactly what it was, to change the structure. This is just their drinking water. And it did not involve adding chemicals. I think it might have been putting it in the light or letting it sit, something. That water has memory. This is what Dolores Cannon was told. And this is what the scientist is theorizing long before Dolores Cannon came out with her stuff. He discovered crystal lattice structures in water. He said that water is the matrix of life on Earth, but biology doesn't understand its most basic functions because it focuses on particulate matter, biology does, and it ignores water, and it ignores the electromagnetic field that all these particles are in, and it just concentrates on the particles. He saw that water had walled cells within itself, like sheaths in areas of plasma up there. He also saw that water and plasma in the human body spontaneously generate structures within the body. And these might be similar features to dusty complex plasma in space that act like computers and may lead to the evolution of intelligence in space. This guy was not popular. So meanwhile, quantum computers and machine intelligence were developed after Johnson discovered, this is a guy called Johnson, discovered how to control electric currents in complex machines with what became known as Johnson junctions, which are little nodes. And there are features in plasma in the human body, not blood plasma, K-cloud type plasma, dusty particle plasma, that are similar. So that there are features in human bodies that are similar to Johnson junctures in computers, which they did in the lab, or features in dusty complex plasmas in space. So same thing up there, same thing replicated in the lab, same thing identified in our body, as above, so below. In 1911, superconductivity was discovered. That's talking about electrical current with no resistance, measured in ohms. Okay. This means the electric current can go on forever, uninterrupted. And this is an electrical perpetual motion. And you don't need to recharge it. That's the significant thing. Then there's a thing called quantum tunneling, which is supercurrent that can leap over thin insulating barriers that connect to superconductors. So by modifying these barriers, they can adjust the flow. And this is all related to computers. Don't ask me. So these little interruptions that they make are Johnson junctions, and they make advanced computers possible, including our iPhones and iPads, and he got the Nobel Prize in Physics for this in 1973. And they can reduce the size of this whole process down to 1 electron, so that the current that's being controlled is moving 1 electron at a time, and this is used for quantum computers. In dusty complex plasma, superconductors and Johnson junctions form. Up in those clouds in the sky, they have been able to show that they form. There are incalculable numbers within the K-clouds, each single one doing intelligent calculation. So they could predict models for every conceivable future event. They're omniscient, by definition. Omniscient. So this is all becoming a little bit too much for my brain. So this is going on in space, and it's the same as what goes on in computers. And so the next logical question is that what goes on in our bodies? So thanks to this guy, St. George, and I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong, and I apologize. We know that the body has organic semiconductors and could, and as a matter of fact, should have superconductivity. This all agrees with the work of Freeman Cope, who claimed that he found superconductivity in the body and electric tunneling, as with Johnson junctions that they replicated in the lab for computers. And so, yes, the body does have this stuff, and it's related to nerve function and growth. It's seen in DNA. And the book cites all these studies and papers and goes over and over all of the confirmation from different research. And in DNA, they've observed the loss of superconductivity in cancer cells. So now they are equating cancer to something electrical going on. So this superconductivity would explain biological sensitivities to weak magnetic fields and microwaves. Some people are more sensitive to living next to electrical stations or standing too close to the microwave or whatever. The author says that this flurry of research went quiet all at the same time. And they were making great progress. And then, boom, it just sort of disappeared. And so he asks the question, this is the author asking the question, security agencies. So plasma-based mechanisms is what they're describing, by which our bodies are affected by magnetic fields, microwave fields. This is all experimental stuff that so far, so good, seems to replicate what we already know in the galaxies and other things that they've discovered. For example, some birds migrate. How do they know where to go? They use the electromagnetic fields of the Earth, which creates biochemical changes in their brain. That's how they know. They're not reading street signs. And the question is, can this interface account for human consciousness and behavior? How does this, because, if this is happening all around us and all above us and all inside of us, how is it affecting us? In 1989, 5 different researchers agreed that ordered complexity in the bodies exists as adjoining cells communicate like computers do across Johnson junctions. So 5 researchers in 1989 say this is true. Could any of this knowledge or all of this knowledge be used to create robots that are half organic and half inorganic? And the answer is yes. And all this AI stuff, what's really going on here? What's the agenda? Super soldiers. And that should scare everybody to death. So chapter 15, how our bodies emit light. Biophotons, the eyes can't see this. This is light that comes from electrons, and they're very useful in diagnosis, but our eyes don't have the capability of seeing that range of light. They're fundamental to our existence, and when these emissions change, it's the first indication that cancer is developing. Further indication that cancer is related to electromagnetic activity in the body. And these can be seen on some tests. And they can be useful in cancer diagnosis or very early detection. They would be able to zap tumors that are only a few cells right at the beginning of them starting. In order to see them, they use special photography, and the person has to sit for a long time in a completely dark room. And then they can photograph the normal light emission from the body. I don't think I, excuse me. Darn, I don't think I wrote the number down. But here's the chapter. Yeah. Okay, what I'm going to show you is really bizarre looking. This is a photograph. This is a photograph of a person sitting in a completely dark room with this special kind of photography. And what you're seeing is the light emitted by the electrons in his body. I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can see that. Yeah. So theoretically, they can use biophotons. That's the light emitted by biophotons. They can use those for cancer detection. But after the 1990s, the research all shut down. Money disappeared, dried up. And many of the researchers who were involved in this are now dead. But it's still being studied by the Dutch. They're the only group in Europe. At the University of Leiden, a Dr. Van Wyck, and he has also worked with the Japanese. And in 2014, he published the definitive book on biophotons, first found in research on onion growth in the 1920s, 1923. They were discovering receptors on cell membranes that were triggered by mitotic signals to grow. And this was weird discoveries come from the most unusual places. They'll be studying one thing and they'll stumble onto something else. And if they're astute enough, they'll recognize, oh, what's this? So scientist Gurwitch this scientist named Gurwitch was nominated for the Nobel Prize many times, and all of his research was kind of lost to World War II and the Cold War. Researchers postulated plasmatic states within living organisms. So this is still a big debate, right? And that these plasma states inside the body were very organized, that they organized themselves, and they're cold plasma, even though the body is warm. And they're predominantly in the brain. Hope I didn't lose a page there. Let me make sure. Hate that piece of paper flew out. So this bioplasma in the body, it joins with the physical body. They now know this, and it helps the physical body to operate. And it coordinates and guides its growth and development. That's what Nostradamus said, that this is all coming externally into the physical body. Aristotle's pneuma. That's what that is. This was a bioplasma, the fifth state of material, fifth state of matter. And the bioplasma and the ether are the energy around the body that connect together to the universe. And Aristotle knew about this. Modern bioplasma science has confirmed Aristotle. Russian scientists are on the cutting edge of this, but they were kept away from Western science because they were studying at the same time parapsychology and remote viewing under the auspices of plasma physics. All ties together. Here we go. And what we get is, make sure I'm quoting the right thing here. A living organism can be described as a biological field or a biofield. We have obtained evidence that a fifth state of matter, bioplasma, exists as a part of each organism's biofield. Bioplasma consists of ions, free electrons, and free protons. It's highly conductive, provides opportunities for the accumulation of transfer of energy within the organism, as well as among different organisms. Bioplasma appears to be concentrated in the brain and the spinal cord. At times, it may extend considerable distances from the organism, raising the possibility of telepathic and psychokinetic phenomena. Boom. So, Ilyushin was the chief scientist in Russia that was doing this, and he had worked with a guy called Kirlian, well, a man and his wife named Kirlian. And if you remember a long time ago, I don't know, the 70s maybe, Kirlian photography, where they claimed that they were able to photograph the auras around people. Well, yeah, they did. And Ingo Swann, the guy that we covered a while back, Ingo Swann, who did remote viewing, that's what this is all. And of course, what happened? The military uses it. So most of his work in Ilyushin is not translated into English, including his name. So he saw that bioplasma was the dynamic grid of electrical excitation produced by polarization of biological semiconductors, which interact with fields outside the body. So now that you understand that, we're done. Okay, this was a complicated part of the book. So this guy worked with a Polish man called Sedlak, and they agreed that this biological field has a complex broadband wave structure, and it stores holograms, or better known as consciousness. And they call this the holonomic brain theory, that there's a holographic memory out there. And it can be done without using light rays. That the K clouds would have highly advanced holographic capability because of their dynamic grid of electrical excitation produced by the magnetic polarization. and that this holographic memory could generate and transmit information to our brains from the cloud. And he makes a comment, how ironic is that, the cloud, the K cloud. Melanin stores bioplasma and is a semiconductor. And it collects bioplasma in its nucleus to protect DNA. So, I'm going to read you something and then I'll read you my response. Biophoton, they map meridians and the acupuncture points, the acupuncture meridians, and the chi. So, you know, when people talk about putting acupuncture needles along meridians, and everybody at, I don't know, these big medical clinics like Johns Hopkins went, oh yeah, right, sure. Well, guess what? The acupuncturists a couple thousand years ago were right. And I wrote WTF. Okay. Now we are on chapter 16, the death flash and the life flash. The death flash is the emission of, okay, and I want to add that death and life are being used in a kind of a, like a layperson's term. They're not saying that life begins or that permanent, never-ending, total lack of existence happens at death, or that the beginning of life is the life flash. They're just using those terms as a start and a stop of a state of being. So, the death flash is the emission of a flash of light at the moment of death. It's also called a necrotic photon emission. And when we did Dr. Peter Fenwick, that older English doctor whose wonderful books talked about the experience of people in the process of dying who claim to see things, and then nurses who see the soul leaving the body, and near-death experience, all those books that we did probably about a year or so ago. This is what they're talking about. The necrotic photon emission can be followed by faint mist, like a ghostly mist that's visible to the eye. So in 1987, research was done doing flash measurements, and it reflects the rate of dying in intensity and duration. So in other words, they discovered that if they measured, there was a relationship between the process of dying and the length and timing of this flash. And they said that this may account for the light people describe when they have a near-death experience. So we're connecting all kinds of things here today. The electromagnetic field produced by necrotic radiation, which is this flash, containing energy, internal structure, and information, may permit the continuation of consciousness beyond the death of the body. That's science talking. So this challenges society's rigid materialistic view of life. This really demands that we open our minds. Energy and light have mass, and studies were done to weigh the soul, but the Egyptians believed the soul needed to be lighter than a feather. Then the Egyptians weighed souls, they believed, after death, and depending on how much your soul weighed, you went one way or the other. And I'm getting hiccups. Sorry. So there are many stories of people seeing mist rising up from someone who's died. Kirlian photography was made of moments of death, and they saw sparks and flares of bioplasmic bodies shooting out and floating away. In the near-death experience, people often talk about floating above their body. Is this the mist that's experiencing this? The Russians did studies on the dying. I'm sure they did. And they concluded that the energy from the body dissipates very slowly. It's not a moment and it's over. So everything, cell division, fertilization, cell death, death of the body, all of it lets off photo emissions. So biophotons contain coded information in their electromagnetic field. They have a degree of coherence, which is another word for integration and logical connection. So could biophoton measure be an accurate indication of clinical death? Rather than taking vital signs, pulse, or brain waves, could they actually measure biophoton emission to know if you were dead or not? So there are many recent discoveries that have been made about light. This stuff is new. Not a lot of people know about it, so you guys are ahead of the game. 2005, they discovered that light is stored as nanophotons in crystals that are the size of viruses, that all organisms seem to have cavities of light within them. Is this the source of the death flash that's released when you die? The book cites Raymond Moody that we've talked about, Glimpses of Eternity, where deathbed stories are repeated in this book, and this talks all about that. So Raymond Moody, Glimpses of Eternity, is a good book. Oh, and here we go. Dr. Peter Fenwick, our friend, The Art of Dying, on 2008, who had all these narratives about people reporting seeing smoke or mist rising from the body, and is this ectoplasm. Ectoplasm, that's the word, and thank you to the viewer who remembered and reminded me. Ectoplasm is the old-fashioned word that was used in seances by mediums to describe this white stuff, various densities, sometimes mist, sometimes a kind of a glow, and sometimes something solid that came from mediums or spirits or whatever. I mean, it's complicated. But now they're linking this to plasma physics is what they're doing. They're saying maybe these people were not as crazy as we think they are. Mainstream science, not me. So this seems to be a death signal, this mist thing. And it's more of a domino effect than a moment. It's a process. It triggers molecule to molecule to die, and it's slow. It's a slow domino effect, a trigger wave. And apotheosis is the fancy word for death. And they're discovering that it involves plasma waves, signals. And there's this theory called information theory that says that artificial intelligence sees intelligence as a flow of information, and they're linking that to this plasma wave at death. The information comes, the information goes. So a plasma allows countless variables to be considered at once, the way our brains do. It's not just one thing and then another thing and then another thing. It's all this stuff. And women's brains have been shown, this is just a little interesting tidbit, women are much better at multitasking. Their brains are much better at considering many things at the same time. And they're much more able to, they did this experiment. I may have talked about this before. It's one of my favorite experiments, where they told people they were applying for a job, separated them so that there was only one person waiting in this room at a time. And this room was set up like a dressing room backstage, where there was a long counter and long mirrors and just stuff all over the counters. What they didn't know is there were people behind the mirrors watching, and they were recording what they saw the person waiting do. And long story short, the men who waited couldn't name anything that was sitting on this counter. The women were like rattling off long lists, because women are more aware of their environment. Maybe a protective thing, maybe an evolutionary thing. You need to be aware of your surroundings, right? You're more vulnerable. Anyway, plasma, that's another thing. Sorry, I'm digressing. Plasma allows countless variables. So how do universal fields help influence or create our consciousness? That's the big question. So if all of this is related to the passage of information and a self-awareness and ability to replicate for the presence of life, and it is occurring inside of us, around us, and above us, how do we define our consciousness? Is that created by that? Are we, what's going on? So chapter 17 is called Our Plasma Selves. And he begins by saying that fields contribute energy and information. That's what they are. And atomic physical matter is rare. We know that 99% of the world is plasma, and that whole atomic physical matter is less than 1%. And it makes far more sense that we would be plasma bodies. That is what we would expect based on those facts. And the information theory that we just talked about, that artificial intelligence sees intelligence as a flow of energy. Intelligent machines are made from logic junctions with binary yes-no answers. For example, thermostats, cell phones, CDs, artificial intelligence, they all come from that. So we're reassessing. Cutting edge science is reassessing what exactly is intelligence. It's the process. It's processing and communicating information is what intelligence is. So if we can see this in other parts of the universe and we can see it in plants, then we have to reevaluate our understanding. In biology, growth occurs when information encoded in DNA is communicated. That's how that whole process works. In 1935 in Japan, they related, this is really interesting, they were able to directly prove a relationship between blood clotting, the rate of blood clotting, and solar activity. In 1940s in Russia, they were able to connect magnetic phenomena effect with organisms' electromagnetic stuff in the body. So external electromagnetic effects affected, for example, the heart. And they were able to show that in Russia in the 40s. So the communication of information by the interaction of electromagnetic fields and plasma, it's intelligence. It's passing on information and it affects processes. In 1970, this was discussed in a book called The Electromagnetic Fields and Life by a guy called Pressman. Every upright body is an ellipsoid, really, if you want to look at it that way. And they show diagrams of the human body and the currents, the electrical currents and the magnetic currents. And we're just a homogeneous connecting ellipsoid. Nice. Electromagnetic energetic interactions convert information, and that's what our body is doing all day long. They share it, they transmit it. It's all part of the biological processes that we run with. Information is not just facts, words and facts. Signals are information. They activate. For example, hormones and nerves provide information to each other and send signals, and those signals produce a reaction. DNA generates radio frequency signals. There's something to think about. RNA amplifies radio frequency signals. Enzymes and amino acids, are effectors of the coded signals from DNA and RNA. So this doesn't negate the importance of chemical reactions in the body, biochemical reactions. It just reassesses the primacy of it, that there's something else going on underneath it. They also were able to show that cell walls are noise filters, that noise being input that they don't want. Environmental electromagnetic fields carry information which activate molecules and generate signals by giving them information that causes things to happen and triggers processes in the body. So biology is really just orchestrated information flows. And conventional biology says that it isn't, that it's all biochemical, that cells are bags of enzymes that interact chemically through diffusion. And what these new discoveries have found is that all this stuff is triggered, and it's triggered electromagnetically. Pressman showed current flows across membranes. It's not just diffusing through membranes. It's not osmosis, it's current flowing through. And that's what mattered in biological processes. Energy has structure and direction, and energy transmits triggering information. Energy in the form of electricity. Body signals are the transmission of information inside and outside of the body. That, it's coming at us from the outside and happening within us, and it is electromagnetic. Diverse interconnections within organisms by means of electromagnetic fields are happening all the time. And as with Szent-Györgyi, that guy, the Hungarian, more recent scientists say the body has organic semiconductors that modulate and control current flows and information signals, which are bioinformation. This is seen in the sensitivity and response to electromagnetic fields in many species, including humans. So all this fancy terminology, if I understand it correctly, is just saying, look, we are much more complicated than we thought. Flows of electromagnetic currents are at play with each other and at play with the environment and coming into us from the outside and occurring within us, and are the drivers of all these processes that we didn't fully understand before. David Bohm, BOHM, in the 1940s saw intelligence in the movement of plasma related to plasma's electromagnetic field. He put active information at the heart of all particles and said there was a causal interpretation. Dare I say it, cause and effect in the quantum world, the world that's so tiny. And he said that we don't have all the information yet because there are hidden variables, and that those are information driving the heart of the universe. The universe unfolds because of the exchange of information between fields and particles. We just don't know enough yet to fully understand it, but that eventually this is going to explain the relationship between mind and matter. The activity of information on a quantum level is similar to the activity of information in ordinary human subjective experience, in other words, our consciousness. Plasma in the brain may let bizarre and uncertain quantum phenomena enter our brains, and at this point, these scientists agree, physics meets metaphysics. The entire universe is triggered by information exchanges between fields and particles, and is some unknown field that exists in another dimension, maybe, that interacts too. And this is called an implicate order, an implied order. The universe, the explicate order, so the one we already know about, unfolds from some unknown field or dimension, the implicate order. So there's still a lot of stuff we don't know. And then I put a big question mark. This works like a hologram, and it's over 3D. It's the record of an object, and it is present everywhere, and it underlies all intelligence, including us, including plasma. Okay. So then Rupert Sheldrake, that's a name that's come up before. And if I'm not mistaken, he was friends with, worked with, interacted with, oh my God, now I've forgotten his name, John, who wrote about he wrote the book on Lawrence of Arabia. And he wrote the book on experiencers of UFO abduction. And he was the one who was willing to not be closed-minded about the whole thing. And then he died tragically getting hit by a car in England. I think he was friends with Rupert Sheldrake, or at least work companions, they peers, science peers. And Rupert Sheldrake had this theory of morphic resonance, which is transmission of information and containing form, how to create form being sent through fields, and the communication of information as form. And Descartes said this was the soul, a thinking subject, thinking substance. And the author of this book says that what they're both talking about, Rupert Sheldrake talking about form being transmitted by fields, Descartes talking about the soul being a thinking substance, they're both talking about plasma. So then he talks about information capture. How does this information get taken, brought in? So moths need one molecule to find a flower, one molecule of scent to find a flower. Birds of prey are able to find a mouse down on the ground with their eyes. And satellites can identify all sorts of stuff on the ground. They can get a car's license plate number. Can we extrapolate this into the paranormal? What's paranormal? What's the paranormal? John Mack. I knew his name would come to me. Sometimes if I try too hard, my brain refuses. So, this is really interesting. They did this experiment with a dog. They locked it in a room with a coded lock, and the dog figured out how to get out of the room. He was eventually able to hit the right combination. I guess they're saying that eventually, we'll figure everything out. Tesla had visual flashes that disturbed him as a kid. Well, as far as the dog goes, the extrapolation they made was that the knowledge of the code was somehow in the environment. Tesla had these visual flashes that disturbed him as a child, and he called them living flames. And was this him connecting to plasma? Because he's so smart. He had so much more knowledge. One night he spent the whole night with cold compresses, and then when he would do that, that's when he would get new ideas. So the question is, was he seeing his own plasma body interacting with information beyond him? The physical body is not sufficiently insulated from the plasma body. And when you've got a hyped up plasma body, because you're wired differently, this can create problems. Do great geniuses have a greater access to the plasma field and therefore to information? Okay, we talked about voids. Voids are important for structures because they define the structures. Voids are meticulously formed. They're not just random empty. They're not random. They're geometric. And they get refilled in cycles. And this is true of plasma. So in spaces between things, you need the spaces between things, because if they're all completely filled up, there's no flexibility and no work can be done. It's kind of like for a flow, you need a void. So I don't know why that was there at the end of this chapter, but that's interesting to think about. So chapter 18, wrapping up the universe. We need to move away from our focus on biochemistry, he said, to the interaction in the brain between plasma and electromagnetic fields in the external. And does this help to form and inform the mind? Is it about an exchange of information on a massive scale with basically the gigantic computer within which we live? Physical matter is rare, and the universe is full of life forms that won't be physical life forms, and they'll be made out of plasma, including intelligent forms of plasma. So we're made of plasma with a core physical form to function within the physical world. We need that to function in a 3D world. But 99% of life is plasma, and 90% of us is plasma. So everything depends on dust. And it gives plasma something to hang on to. And huge electromagnetic forces are existing in dusty plasma clouds. They eat particles like whales eat plankton. The sun and stars spew plasma as a solar wind. These clouds are held together, even if they're diffuse, really spread out by powerful electromagnetic forces, the way gravity is. Dust grains spin around out there, and they generate energy, and they create structure and internal organization that form a crystalline structure, which forms double helixes, which stores information. And they have filaments that conduct electrical currents, and they become semiconductors. And the voids that they create separate different organs, I want to call them organs, functioning systems, with different functions in a larger system, just like our bodies have voids. These plasma things have regenerative capabilities, high levels of complexity, and by extrapolation from what we understand, they may be intelligent. They compete for food, they cooperate with each other, they communicate with each other. Like ball lightning behaves like it has an intelligence, and maybe it does. Plasma in our brain helps our intelligence. It helps it to evolve and function in the same way that plasma in space creates. The predominant form of life in the universe is inorganic. And complex plasmas function as large quantum computers function. Ball lightning goes through solids just like electricity does with quantum tunneling. We have plasma bodies, and they interact with universal fields. And what does this say about our potential intelligence? We're just not plugging in. Neurons function in groups, and they work distributed across the brain. This is called connectionism, parallel distributed processing. They didn't used to believe that. Now they understand it's true. Intelligence comes from connections over a distance, both in the brain and in the universe. In space, long-range order is crucial to the integrity of the plasma clouds. Particles form coherent entities over long distances. This is called long-range order and action at a distance. This is what drove Newton nuts. He called it a philosophical absurdity. Well, Newton drove me nuts, so turnaround's fair play. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. It's non-locality. It's quantum entanglement. Things are far apart, but they can still interact and be entangled with each other. This is the quantum state. And interestingly enough, just like the magician card in tarot, as above, so below, the macro and the micro mirror each other. Information can exceed the speed of light. It has no mass. Information can knit a network across vast distances. It can be a unifying factor, creating stability as an entity. This is long-range order. Particles can be very far apart and still work together like one organism. And we call this quantum entanglement. Information and energy can have coherence, long-range order, work together from far away. And he ends the book asking, is this intelligence? He says, if this is intelligence, if these computer ways of looking at it, plasma ways of looking at it are true, then these K-clouds above us are vastly more intelligent than us because they contain vast computing powers. That's how he ends the book. So I hope that I was able to give enough clarity to get you intrigued enough to read the book. It's a complex book. It's not easy. It has to be taken in little bits, kind of compartmentalized like a plasma cloud. But it's well worth the effort. And I, who absolutely am the world's worst physics student ever, I enjoyed going through this book. So that tells you how well written it is, how interesting it is, how compelling these theories are, and a little bit of conspiracy theory thrown in. That's always good. Dash of salt. So that's it for now. And tomorrow, Denise and I hope, as long as she's okay, we're going to do a conversation about this book, because she's the one who told me about it. She did a video on it too, which I didn't watch because I didn't want to be influenced before I read the book. So I might watch that tonight. So I'm glad you stuck with me to the bitter end, and I hope you enjoyed it, and it's food for thought. Thank you very much. I'll be back later. Slán go fóill and sláinte.